So imagine you have this flawless 17th century Italian viola, right?
Oh, a dream.
Yeah, exactly. It's an aerodynamic Ferrari, just a masterpiece. But the bow you're holding to play it, it's literally a wooden wagon wheel.
A very clunky, heavy wagon wheel.
Right. And today, for all you dedicated students, teachers, and performers tuning in to this Viola Studio deep dive, we are completely dismantling that wagon wheel. We're getting into Chapter 8, which is just simply titled Viola Bows, from Maurice W. Riley's definitive text, The History of the Viola, Volume 1.
Yes, the absolute Bible for this stuff.
It really is, and we want to find out why it took luthiers, nearly 200 years to figure out how to actually drive their own instruments.
It's a fascinating lag in history.
It is wild. And we aren't just relying on Riley's historical text today. We are layering in the really invaluable, hands-on technical insights of the eminent New York bowmaker and expert William Salchow.
Which is huge, having a modern maker's perspective.
Totally. Alongside crucial citations from Etienne Vatelot's massive work, Les Archives Français, and Joseph Roda's Bows for Musical Instruments.
Yeah, we are going completely under the hood today for you guys.
Oh, absolutely. We're looking at every millimeter, every gram, and honestly, every fierce historical rivalry that basically forced the viola bow to evolve.
Because it really is the absolute definition of a historical lag.
Yeah.
I mean, we obsess over the resonance chamber.
Yeah, totally. The curves, the varnish.
Right, the centuries of Italian lutherie.
Mm-hmm.
But the true voice of the viola, like the actual sound you hear it, is entirely unlocked by the bow.
Yeah.
Yet for generations, it was basically treated as an afterthought. So today, we're going to explore the physics of the wood, the geometry of the frog in the head, and really the intense demands of the music itself that finally forced makers to adapt.
Welcome to Viola Studio. We are a YouTube channel dedicated to the technical, pedagogical, and artistic development of viola students and instrumentalists. In every episode, our goal is to provide a concise and entertaining analysis. We will explore key themes, the messages of the great masters, and the historical context that shaped the sound of our instrument. Whether you are taking your first steps in the alto clef, or you are a professional seeking a new perspective, there is something for everyone at Viola Studio.
Don't miss our upcoming episodes, and remember,
There's always time to explore the history and the heart of classical music.
Okay, well, let's unpack this timeline mismatch first, because it's wild. According to Riley, the viola in its present form had essentially evolved and was perfected mostly before the year 1600.
Right.
Very early. The great luthiers in Cremona and Brescia, they were continuing to refine it through the 17th century, but the box itself, the instrument, was largely figured out.
Yeah, the acoustic principles were locked in.
Exactly. But during that same 17th century, when these outstanding luthiers were selling their, perfected violas, they were basically throwing in the bows and the cases almost as a package deal.
It was essentially packing material.
Packing material.
Yeah, it was just an accessory. The bow was simply not considered as important as the instrument itself. I mean, it was a means to an end.
That's so crazy to think about now.
It is, but you have to remember, during that period, the luthier's primary focus was the acoustic optimization of that wooden box.
Right.
The stick with horsehair was just there to activate the string. The makers weren't going to invent a new complex bow just for the sake of it.
I look at the incredible geometric perfection of an Amati or a Gasparo da Salo viola from that era, and I'm trying to reconcile that with a primitive, arching, heavy stick of generic wood.
It's a stark contrast.
It really is. If the instrument was perfected by 1600, how did these brilliant makers not hear that the bow was fundamentally choking the potential of their instrument?
Well, what's fascinating here is that we're projecting modern acoustic expectations onto 17th century musicians.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. The music written for the viola at that time simply did not demand a highly engineered tool. Bowmaking has almost always been a reactive art.
Reactive meaning they wait for the musicians to complain.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The catalyst for change wasn't the instrument, it was the repertoire. As music moved from, polyphonic consort playing to highly technical soloistic demands, the bow just had to be continuously redesigned to keep pace.
Ah, so the software demanded a hardware update.
Exactly. That is a perfect way to put it.
So the older, heavier, less resilient bows from the 17th century, they were fine for long, sustained vocal style lines.
Right. Choral music transcriptions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, but they were a complete liability once the music started to bounce.
Precisely. Usually, as the demands increased, this resulted in longer and lighter bows.
Yeah.
But the real breaking point came in the late 18th century.
Okay.
There was an increasing emphasis on highly technical bowing techniques. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the makers were responding to the demands of virtuosi who were pushing the absolute physical limits of what a piece of wood and horsehair could do.
Who are we talking about here?
Well, Riley specifically notes fine visiting Italian violinists like G.B. Viotti, who lived from 1755 to 1824.
Viotti, okay.
Yeah, as well as the many native virtuosi who were just tearing up the Paris scene at the time.
Okay, I want to focus on what Viotti and those Parisian virtuosi were actually demanding from their bows, because we are really talking about the rise of specific strokes here.
Yeah.
Staccato and spiccato.
The bouncing strokes.
Exactly.
Right.
And for our string players listening, you guys know that to execute a brilliant off-the-string spiccato, your right hand needs the bow to act like a perfectly calibrated spring.
It has to do the work for you.
Right. You need it to absorb the energy of the drop, bite the string, and instantly release that energy to bounce back into the air at a very specific tempo.
And this is where the material science becomes the absolute bottleneck.
A word they were using, yeah.
Before the late 18th century, bows were often made of snakewood, ironwood, or other, dense tropical hardwoods.
They're heavy.
Heavy and incredibly strong, yes. But they lacked the specific resonant frequency and kinetic memory required to naturally oscillate at the tempos the new music demanded.
Okay, what does that feel like for a player?
Well, if you tried to play a rapid spiccato passage with an ironwood bow, the stick wouldn't help you at all. You would be manually lifting and dropping the dead weight of the wood for every single note.
Oh, that sounds exhausting.
It was exhausting. And acoustically, it was muddy. It just didn't work for what Viotti was writing.
So they needed a magic material. They needed something that had the strength of ironwood, the mass to pull a sound out of a thick string, but the lively, returning spring of, like, a pole vaulter's fiberglass pole.
Exactly that combination.
And they found it. But what I love about this story is they didn't find it by scouring the globe for the perfect acoustic wood.
No, not all.
It was already sitting in the shipyards of Europe for something completely unrelated.
It really is one of the great accidents of musical history. French bowmakers were doing considerable experimentation to meet the needs of Viotti, and they ultimately achieved the ideal shake, length, and weight of the bow stick by discovering Pernambuco wood.
Pernambuco?
Yes. But Pernambuco, which comes from the Cisalpina echinata tree in Brazil.
Wait, I want to make sure the students catch that. Cisalpina echinata.
Right. It was actually being imported for the textile industry.
The textile industry, not instruments.
Right. Its heartwood yields a very rich red dye.
So you have these massive logs of dense, heavy wood sitting on the docks in France, intended to dye silk and wool for the aristocracy, right?
Yeah, just sitting there.
And some astute bowmaker, or perhaps several, through trial and error, takes a scrap of it, bends it, and realizes it possesses the ultimate trifecta for bows: strength, weight, and resiliency.
It's amazing. And to understand why Pernambuco changed everything, we have to look at its cellular structure.
Okay, let's get into the weeds here.
Pernambuco has incredibly long, straight, and densely packed continuous fibers. This botanical structure gives it a unique kinetic memory.
Kinetic memory, meaning it remembers where it was.
Essentially, yeah. When a player applies downward pressure for a staccato bite, the stick flexes, absorbing the kinetic energy into those long fibers. But because of the wood's density and structure, it desperately wants to return to its original shapes.
Yeah, so it snaps back.
Exactly. That rapid energy transfer is what makes the bow feel alive. It actively participates in the stroke.
So with Pernambuco wood in hand, and the Italians demanding better performance, the entire epicenter of bowmaking just shifts dramatically.
Yeah, completely different.
Right. The great demand for better bows toward the end of the 18th century influenced many French craftsmen to specialize exclusively in bowmaking.
They stopped doing it on the side.
Exactly. They stopped treating it as a side hustle to violin making. We see the rise of highly specialized, fiercely competitive shops, especially in Mirecourt and Paris.
And because these French makers specialized, they produced just superlative products. French bowmakers soon achieved the exact same type of worldwide reputation that had long been enjoyed by the Italian luthiers.
The Italians had the instruments, the French had the bows.
Exactly.
And at the absolute center of this French Revolution is François Xavier Tourte, who lived from 1750 to 1835.
The master.
Rayleigh points out that the sudden rise to success of French bowmaking can be largely attributed to the genius and artistry of Tourte. I mean, his bows actually became the models of excellence that have never been surpassed.
It's incredible to have that kind of legacy.
Truly. And Etienne Vadelot, in his definitive book Les Archers Français, says, and I quote, "His fantastic skill allowed him to realize some incomparable work and has given rise to his nickname of the Stradivari of bowmakers."
That is the ultimate compliment in the string world. I mean, the Stradivari of anything.
Yeah.
Tourte is recognized as being the finest bow maker of all time and was largely responsible for determining the length and shape of the bow in its present form.
Okay, wait, I have to challenge this Stradivari of bowmakers title just a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Is that just French national pride speaking? Because as we know from Rayleigh's text, and as you guys listening know, the viola itself is notoriously unstandardized.
That is very true.
You have 15-inch violas, you have 17.5-inch violas. How can Tourte be the undisputed, flawless master of the viola bow if he couldn't possibly optimize a single design for such a wildly varying instrument?
That is an excellent pushback, and it really cuts to the core of the violist's reality. Tourte's absolute dominance in Paris created a paradigm for the violin bow.
Right, the violin bow?
Yes. He standardized the violin bow's length, weight, and balance point almost flawlessly. But when he applied that genius to the viola bow, he was essentially shooting at a moving target.
Because the violas were all over the place.
Exactly. Because the string length, tensions, and physical dimensions of violas varied so drastically. A single standardized viola bow was just a physical impossibility.
Which perfectly explains the fascinating paradox William Salchow points out. Despite Tourte's absolute genius, he did not establish the standard dimensions of the modern viola bow.
No one has.
No one has. But Salchow did furnish Rayleigh with specific measurements for a Tourte viola bow made around 1815. And for the teachers and players listening, we need to really look at these numbers because these tiny fractions of a millimeter completely dictate the sensory experience of your right hand.
Oh, absolutely. Let's look at the geometry of that 1815 Tourte masterpiece.
Okay, first, the length of the wood, only not including the button, right,
Yes, a stick.
is 72.8 centimeters, or 28 and 5/8 inches. And Salchow notes this is the standard length of a French bow, whether it's for a violin or a viola. The Tourte viola bow is not longer than a violin bow.
Which surprises a lot of people.
It does. Next, the head. The Tourte has an unusually high head. It's 26 millimeters, or exactly 1 inch.
Let's pause on that 26 millimeter head.
Yeah, break that down for us.
A higher head geometry shifts a tiny amount of mass further away from the stick, and it also changes the angle at which the hair meets the tip.
Okay.
This increases the clearance between the hair and the wood, allowing a violist to sink deeper into the string without the stick grinding against it.
Oh, which is a terrible sound, so you get more runway, essentially.
Exactly.
And we see that same philosophy mirrored at the frog. The distance from the stick to the hair at the frog on this 1815 Tourte is 20.5 millimeters.
Which is about 13/16 of an inch.
Right, and Salchow explicitly states this is high. Most viola bows are about 19.5 millimeters, or 3/4 of an inch.
Right, so Tourte is a full millimeter higher.
And finally, the weight. With a whalebone winding, it weighs exactly 69 grams, or 2 7/16 ounces.
There is just a wealth of mechanical data in those numbers. A high frog of 20.5 millimeters paired with a high head of 26 millimeters means the entire ribbon of hair is held further away from the stick.
It's parallel, but further out.
Yes, and this raises an important question about leverage. For a violist, who have to dig into a thicker string, having that extra clearance means they can apply more arm weight before the stick bottoms out.
But since Tourte didn't leave a strict, universal standard for the viola bow, we have to transition into what actually defines a viola bow today.
Because you can't just copy an 1815 Tourte and assume it works for every modern viola.
Exactly. And for this, we rely entirely on the parameters provided by Salchow. And his parameters are brilliant because they define the viola bow not by rigid blueprints, but by its relationship to the violin bow and by its mechanical function.
It's a very practical approach. Let's look at length first. As we mentioned with Tourte, there is no standard length. However, Salchow is adamant. Viola bows are not longer than violin bows.
They aren't.
No. Some are up to 1.3 centimeters, which is about half an inch shorter, but they are very rarely slightly longer.
Here's where it gets really interesting mechanically. It might be slightly shorter, but it is heavier.
Yes, significantly.
Salchow states they are heavier than violin bows by about 10 grams, which is a third of an ounce. He gives the average weight range for a modern viola bow as being from 64 to 74 grams.
That's the sweet spot today.
But I have a question here. Why can't a violist just use a lighter bow and apply more downward arm weight? Like, if I just lean into it, shouldn't that compensate for the missing 10 grams of wood?
That is a very common misconception. But if we connect this to the physics of acoustics, specifically the Helmholtz motion of a bowed string, adding manual arm weight is not the same as intrinsic mass in the bow.
Okay, unpack the Helmholtz motion for us.
Sure. The C string of a viola is incredibly thick. It has a heavy core, and it operates at a lower tension compared to, say, a violin Z string.
It's basically a cable.
Right. And to initiate the slipstick mechanism, where the rosin grabs the string, pulls it sideways, and lets it snap back hundreds of times a second, you need a specific moment of inertia.
Ah, the bow has to overcome the resting mass of that thick C string.
Exactly. If you use a light bow and simply force your arm weight into it, you are applying vertical crushing pressure.
Which chokes the string.
It completely chokes it. It stops the string from vibrating freely in its natural elliptical pattern. The extra 10 grams of mass in a proper viola bow provides the necessary downward force through gravity and inertia, allowing the player to draw the bow horizontally.
So the bow does the heavy lifting.
Yes. The bow does the work, allowing the string to ring rather than being choked out by your arm.
That makes total sense. And the weight isn't the only difference designed to grab that string. A viola bow requires about 10% more of the same strong, unbleached hair than a violin bow.
Which directly impacts the surface area of the rosin interacting with the string's winding.
More hair, more rosin.
Right. That 10% extra hair widens the ribbon, creating a larger contact patch. You have a thicker string, you need a wider ribbon of hair to adequately create the friction necessary to sustain that Helmholtz motion we just talked about.
And Salchow notes an interesting historical trend here. Present-day violists actually want heavier, but not necessarily larger bows than those made in the early 19th century.
The demands keep shifting.
Right. And despite all these measurements and trends, Salchow's ultimate concluding advice for a violist selecting a bow is profoundly pragmatic. He recommends that a violist should choose one which is found to be comfortable, which does what is wanted, and which produces the sound desired.
Which sounds obvious, but it's so important.
Right. The numbers are a diagnostic tool, a guide, but the ultimate test is the physical connection between player, bow, and instrument.
And having established these mechanical baselines, the evolution of the French bow becomes this incredible story of generations of master craftsmen playing with these precise dimensions.
Handing down the secrets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is a lineage mostly centered around the town of Mirecourt and the city of Paris. The flow of knowledge from master to apprentice in 19th century France is what secured their absolute dominance.
We see this dominance clearly in the work of Joseph Henry.
Oh, Henry, yes.
Born in 1823, died in 1870. He was born in Mirecourt, which really seems to be the absolute cradle of French bowmaking.
It was the hub.
In 1837, he goes to Paris to work in Georges Chenot's shop, and later he works in Dominique Peccatte's shop. Riley notes his bows were greatly influenced by Peccatte.
Naturally.
In 1848, Henry joined Paul Simon, with whom he remained until 1851 when he finally set up his own atelier.
And Salchow provided data on a breathtaking Henry bow made around 1860.
The gold tortoise one?
Yes. It's a gold tortoise viola bow. The craftsmanship involves gold mountings and tortoiseshell for the frog, which is just the height of luxury.
Beautiful.
But look at the geometry compared to Tourte.
Right, let's look at the numbers. Salchow states the head of this Henry bow is 24.5 millimeters, or 31/32 of an inch high. He calls this about average.
Good.
Then the distance from the stick to the hair at the frog is 20.3 millimeters, or 13/16 of an inch. Salchow notes this is higher than average, and the weight of this gold Henry is 67 grams, or 2 3/8 ounces.
So Henry's head is 1.5 millimeters shorter than Tourte's unusually high 26 millimeter head.
Okay, so a slightly shorter head.
But his frog clearance at 20.3 millimeters is virtually identical to Tourte's 20.5 millimeters.
Oh, wow.
And at 67 grams, it sits comfortably in the lower middle of Salchow's 64 to 74 gram modern average, slightly lighter than the 69-gram Tourte.
Now, compare that highly trained apprenticed lineage to a maker with a completely different psychological backstory. Joseph René Lafleur.
This is a great story.
I love this guy. Born in 1812, died in 1879. He was born in Paris, and he actually studied music with the intention of becoming a professional violinist.
He wanted to be on stage.
Yes. As a result, he did not apprentice as a bow maker with his father, Jacques Lafleur, who was a really respected maker himself. Lafleur failed as a violinist, and only then did he turn to bow making as a profession.
There is a deep psychological drive there. You have a man who intimately understood the physical demands of a performer, who felt the frustrations of the repertoire firsthand on the stage, and who then channeled that performer's energy into perfecting the tool.
He knew what was wrong with the bows he was using.
Exactly. It is no wonder he became an outstanding bow maker after several years of experimentation. He knew exactly what the hand needed to feel. Riley highlights a beautiful example of Lafleur's workmanship in a viola bow from around 1840.
But if we want to talk about altering how the hand feels, we have to look at a giant of the era, Dominique Peccatte.
Peccatte, yes.
Born 1810, died 1874. Like Henry, he was born in Mirecourt. He actually began work briefly as a violin maker.
Right.
In 1826, he went to Paris and worked for the legendary Jean-Baptiste Villon, which is where he learned the art of bow making. In 1837, he took over the shop of François Lupeau, and then in 1848, he returned to Mirecourt. Riley unequivocally states he is recognized as one of the greatest craftsmen in the art of bow making.
And the data Salchow provides for a Peccatte viola bow, made around 1850, is fascinating because it fundamentally breaks the geometric trend we've been seeing with Tourte and Henry.
Yes. This is where it's interesting. Salchow says this bow is unusual because the distance from the stick to the hair at the frog is only 18.6 millimeters. Right. He explicitly compares this, noting the average for French bows is about 19.5 millimeters, and the Tourte was 20.5 millimeters. So Peccatte has dropped the frog significantly.
That's huge.
The weight of this Peccatte, however, is 67 grams, exactly the same as the Henry.
I want to focus on that frog height. Tourte at 20.5 millimeters, Peccatte at 18.6 millimeters. That is nearly a 2 millimeter difference in height at the frog.
Which doesn't sound like a lot to a non-player, but I'm trying to visualize this leverage. If I lower the frog by 2 millimeters, my hand is physically closer to the stick.
Yes.
Geometrically, that means I'm trading the brute downward torque of a high frog for a much more responsive, sensitive center of gravity, right? Is that why players prefer it?
You've hit on the exact mechanical trade-off. With a high frog like Tourte's, the player's hand is elevated further from the stick. This increases the lever arm from the hand to the string, which gives a feeling of immense power.
But power is hard to control.
Right. It requires more micromanagement of the stick's tendency to roll laterally in your fingers. When Peccatte lowers the frog to 18.6 millimeters, the player's thumb and fingers are brought closer to the central axis of the wood.
Ah.
The pronation of the hand uri, the inward rotation of the forearm, transfers weight much more directly and stably into the stick.
So it changes the pivot point of the entire right arm mechanism.
Yes.
Yeah.
It feels more stable, more centered. It also subtly shifts the balance point of the bow. A lower frog means slightly less mass at the heel, which might make the tip feel relatively more engaged in the stroke.
And this mechanical shift plays right into Salchow's observation about the broader historical trend toward lower frogs, which was heavily championed by Eugene Sartory.
Sartory, yes. A legend.
Born 1871, died 1946. Sartory apprenticed in Paris with Charles Peccatte and then with Alfred Lamy. He opened his own shop in 1889 and became one of the great master bow makers. The Sartory bow, shown in Riley's text, was made around 1930, representing his late period, and perfectly embodies that modern trend of the lower, more stable frog.
Sartory is truly the bridge into the 20th century modern bow feel. He consolidated everything the previous century had learned in Mirecourt and Paris into a highly functional, highly reliable model that could handle the massive viola concertos being written at the time.
And this generational knowledge transfer in France was staggering. You had entire dynasties, right? The Adam family, the Lamy family, the Millant brothers, and the vast Auchard family, culminating in makers like François Nicolas Voirin, who Riley calls the most important bow maker of the second half of the 19th century.
Which is saying something.
That concentration of talent in France represents an absolute monopoly on the highest echelon of bow making.
But that French dominance created a massive problem for the rest of Europe. If you were a British or German maker, you were suddenly competing against a standard that seemed impossible to beat.
Right, how do you compete with Tourte and Peccatte?
It's exactly. Which led to intense national rivalries, and in the case of England, some highly controversial manufacturing debates.
Oh man, in England, the great champions were the Dodd family. You have John Q. Dodd, who lived from 1752 to 1839. He was born in Stirling, Scotland, into the family of Edward Dodd, who lived an astonishingly long life, by the way, from 1705 to 1810.
Over 100 years old.
Wild. John Q. Dodd specialized in bows, and he was so good he was literally known as the English Tourte.
Naturally.
He had two brothers, James I and Thomas, and a nephew, James II, who also made good bows, but Riley notes they scarcely equaled the quality of their uncle.
And calling him the English Tourte shows just how thoroughly François Xavier Tourte dominated the global consciousness. His name became the literal synonym for perfection.
The benchmark.
But the way Dodd achieved his results is the subject of a massive technical debate between Joseph Roda, author of Bows for Musical Instruments, and William Salchow.
I love this part. This feels like a true crime drama for luthiers.
It really is.
So, Roda claimed that Dodd's best bows, particularly those for viola and cello, were very fine, but he explicitly states that most of Dodd's sticks were cut to the desired sweep, not shaped by heat.
And Salchow forcefully disputes this. He calls it a canard about the curve that he would like to lay to rest, a canard being an unfounded rumor.
Salchow's exact quote for the students listening is, "Some people maintain that Dodd sawed or cut the curve into the stick rather than by bending it in with heat. This is undesirable from a technical viewpoint because if you cut across the grain of the wood, you will severely weaken the bow and it is liable to snap at the head. Generally speaking, the idea that the curve was cut into the wood has no basis, in fact."
He does not hold back.
Not at all. But wait, how could Dodd even achieve a reputation as the English Tourte if there were widespread rumors that his bows were cut and weak?
Well, if we connect this to the material science of wood, Salchow's perspective is entirely validated, and it explains why the rumor is so absurd in the first place. Think of the grain of Pernambuco wood, like a tightly packed bundle of drinking straws running the length of the stick. If you use dry heat to bend the wood into its camber, the downward curve toward the hair, those continuous fibers bend together.
They stay intact.
Right. They retain their unbroken tensile strength. They act as that continuous spring we talked about for spiccato.
But if you take a saw and cut the curve out of a wider block of wood, you are literally severing those fibers.
Exactly. You are cutting right across the bundle of drinking straws. This creates a catastrophic weak point, especially near the head, where the stick is incredibly thin and under immense tension from the hair.
Yikes.
Right where the player applies maximum pressure, the wood's internal structure has been compromised. Salchow knows this inherently as a maker. A cut bow would simply snap under the tension of a viola C-string.
It would explode.
The idea that a master like Dodd would build a guaranteed breaking point into his best bows just defies logic.
It is so satisfying when the physics just definitively settle a historical debate like that. Now, besides the Dodd family, England had other heavy hitters. There was James Tubbs, who lived from 1835 to 1921.
Let me guess his nickname.
Yep. Predictably, he was called the modern English tour.
Of course.
Every country desperately wanted their own tour. As a young man, Tubbs worked for the famous firm W.E. Hill & Sons, making bows that bore the Hill label. But in 1860, Tubbs opened his own shop, and with the assistance of his son Alfred, Tubbs is reputed to have made over 5,000 bows for violin, viola, and cello.
That is staggering output.
5,000! That's unbelievable.
And this desire for a national tour wasn't limited to England either. We see a similar push in Germany and Russia during the second half of the 19th century. Families of German makers, mostly originating from the town of Markneukirchen, began making good viola bows patterned directly after the great French makers.
Markneukirchen was essentially the German equivalent of Mirecourt, right?
Basically, yeah. But as it became overcrowded with fine bow makers, the second and third generations of the established families had to migrate to other cities to find work.
And so that diaspora of German craftsmen spread their specific style widely.
Riley lists the outstanding figures, including Franz Albert Nürnberger II, 1854 to 1931, and Ludwig Christian August Bausch, 1835 to 1871, who was, of course, known as the German Tote.
Naturally.
We also have the Knopf family, Heinrich Knopf from Berlin, and Richard Knopf, who actually came to the United States in 1879, working first in Philadelphia and later in New York City. There is Hermann Richard Frechner, 1856 to 1921. And finally, Nicholas Kittel, 1839 to 1871, who migrated to St. Petersburg, Russia, and became, you guessed it, the Russian Tourte.
The Russian Tourte. But despite all of this brilliant craftsmanship across France, England, Germany, and Russia throughout the 19th century, we must address a very painful reality for modern violists that Salchow brought up earlier.
Oh, this is the tragic part.
It is.
We just spent all this time detailing these legendary makers, talking about the 20.5 millimeter frogs and the exquisite Pernambuco and the heat bending. But if you are a violist today, trying to actually find a 19th century viola bow to purchase,
Good luck.
it is incredibly painfully hard. Why is it so scarce?
It comes down to a legacy of scarcity rooted in the 19th century perception of the viola itself. During the 19th century, there simply was not a great demand for viola bows.
Which feels crazy considering the symphony orchestra was expanding massively during this time. Look at Wagner and Mahler.
I know, but Riley explains exactly why. So many violists at that time were playing very small violas or even violins strung as violas.
Oh, sacrilege.
Right, and because they were playing these small instruments, they just used regular violin bows.
Think about the physics we discussed earlier, guys. If you use a lighter violin bow, missing those crucial 10 grams of mass with 10% less hair on a thickly strung viola, you are not engaging the core of the string.
Not at all.
Imagine playing true viola repertoire with a violin bow. No wonder the viola got such a bad reputation for its tone in the 19th century. They weren't using the right tools to activate the strings, they were just scratching at it.
It was a vicious cycle. The repertoire didn't demand a massive projecting viola sound, so players used small violas and violin bows. Because players didn't ask for viola bows, makers didn't make them.
So the great makers were busy filling orders for violinists and cellists instead.
Exactly. It wasn't until around 1900 that violists really became cognizant of the absolute necessity of playing their instruments with bows specifically designed for their instrument.
The evolution of the viola's repertoire in the 20th century, think of the massive concertos by Walton, Bartók, and Hindemith that finally forced players to seek out proper equipment.
You couldn't play Bartók with a 60-gram violin bow.
You'd be buried by the orchestra. But by the time they realized this, the golden age of 19th century bowmaking had passed.
Leaving behind a massive supply and demand disparity that totally defines the antique market today. Riley notes that today, a fine 19th century viola bow is in such demand that it usually costs more than a comparable violin or cello bow.
Because there just aren't enough Tourtes, Peccattes, or Dodds to go around.
Right. They made hundreds of violin bows, but maybe just a handful of viola bows.
Because of this extreme scarcity of 19th century bows, 20th and 21st century violists are turning increasingly to the products of contemporary bowmakers. Salchow even noted that in his own shop, he presently makes about the same number of viola bows as he does violin bows. The modern demand has finally caught up.
The violist has gone from using a repurposed violin bow to demanding an equal share of the contemporary maker's time and expertise.
It really is a history of adaptation, botanical discovery, and sheer physics. But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought that builds on this legacy of scarcity we just talked about. Since the 19th century masters made so few viola bows, perhaps modern violists are actually in a uniquely privileged position today.
What do you mean?
Well, while violinists are somewhat chained to the ghosts of the past, constantly chasing an antique Tourte or Peccatte at auction, violists are actively forced by this scarcity to collaborate with living contemporary bowmakers. You, as a violist today, aren't just buying an antique, you are directly participating in the ongoing, unwritten history of viola bowmaking. The Stradivari of viola bows might just be working right now, designing a stick specifically tailored for your arm, your instrument, and your sound.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope this summary and analysis have been of great help to you. Please remember that this is only a summary and can never replace the book itself. Therefore, we invite you to truly immerse yourself in the work by reading the original text. If this content was useful to you, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell. Remember, you can share this video with your friends to help our community continue to grow. Warmest regards, and remember, there is always time to learn and explore the world of classical music. A Viola Studio production.